Hello there, all you friends, true believers, and newcomers alike. It's Superfly Comics Guy here. Hope you're doing well. Bringing you a review of The Punisher Max by Garth Ennis Omnibus Volume 1. Garth Ennis's hyper-violent, hyper-gory, hyper-raunchy depiction of Mr. Deathwish himself. We'll be going through the cover, the spine, the contents collected, the build quality, and a flip through, where I can share my thoughts, opinions, and recommendations on the story. And as always, you're always free to leave your own thoughts down below in the comments. And remember, when we get to 1K subs on this channel, I will be doing an omnibus collection tour for you guys, so you know what to do if you want to see that. But with that out of the way, let's dive right into this book. Okay, so here we have the dust jacket to this omnibus. This is the original printing that I have of this book, and this was the only cover available at the time, but this book is scheduled to be reprinted this year sometime, I think it's June. I'm not 100% sure, but this will now be the standard cover for that printing, and that printing will be receiving a direct market cover, which you can see right there. It's kind of a grouping of some covers from the Punisher Born story, and that's one of the stories collected in here. I very much like this, very badass depiction of Punisher and his arsenal. Quite like it. And here's the spine, Max Omnibus. So this is a Max rated title. I'll go into a little bit about what that means later. And this is collecting Born 1 through 4 and Punisher 1 through 30. The Punisher Max series by Garth Ennis. It's got a cover price of 100 US, 127 Canadian. I think that's roughly staying the same for the reprint. But let's have a look under the dust jacket here. There we are. Now, if I had to hazard a guess, I highly doubt the reprint of this book will look the same. They'll probably put some sort of art on board or design or whatever. But this was pretty common for older omnibuses. Very clean design, almost all black. Granted, I think it works pretty well for the Punisher. This black and white design, and you have his logo there. So, pretty straightforward. But now, let's start flipping through, and I can give you some thoughts on the story. Alright, my friends, let's go. Got some black bookend pages here. The Punisher. All written by Garth Ennis, and you can see a credits page here. Interesting the way this is broken up, actually, because you have all of these separate arcs in the book. They're not really connected. These very much are separate stories that feel they could exist in their own bubble, so to speak. So you have Born in the beginning, Kitchen Irish, and so on. What I think I'll do is I'll, give you a general idea of each of these arcs in here. But obviously I'll steer away from spoilers and anything like that. I don't really like to discuss spoilers. We got an introduction here by Mr. Garth Ennis. If you don't know who Garth Ennis is, he's known for his very mature, edgy, raunchy style of writing. He's written The Boys and Preacher. I can't remember what else. I don't know if I've read anything else by Garth Ennis. This might be my first Ennis title. But anyway, he's talking in here about how he never really felt like the Punisher was for him. He felt like Punisher was a bit too superhero-y. Granted, before this, Ennis had written a little bit of the Punisher on the Marvel Knights title. But then he talks a little bit about 9/11 as well, and how some of that stuff changed his way of thinking, as it did for many people. And then he sort of talks about how he got into writing Punisher Max. But yeah, that's one thing I want to touch on before I go further. This is a Max rated title, which means there is very, very mature subject matter in here. And this book very much takes it to the max, no pun intended. We're talking severe violence and gore, like dismemberment and disembowelment, drug use, coarse language, racial slurs, sexual violence. This book can be a lot, so if you're pretty sensitive and you don't like to see that kind of stuff or read that kind of stuff, then fair warning here, this book probably won't be for you. And I would leave because I'm going to be flipping through the artwork, and this book does not shy away from any of that stuff. But anyway, let's go ahead. I can honestly relate a little bit to Garth Ennis' sentiments about never being a big fan of the Punisher, because I was kind of like that for quite a while. That's, I'm probably biased because of what happens in the Ultimate Universe with the Punisher and his interactions, so to speak, with Spider-Man and all that stuff. Again, no spoilers, but wasn't a big fan of the Punisher. But I heard good things about this series, this being known as Punisher's best series, and I did enjoy him in the, I can't really call them the Netflix shows anymore, can I? But you know what I mean, those shows. I thought he was played pretty well by John Bernthal. So you know what, I decided to give this a try. If it's known as his best run, might as well see what it's all about, right? So we start here with Punisher Born, and as you might be able to tell, this is set during the Vietnam War, and it serves to give kind of an origin story for the Punisher. Well, not really origin story, but it kind of shows his time in the Vietnam War and how something during this time, something inside him just snapped, and he became driven by this obsessive need to punish bad people. And yeah, a lot of bad stuff happens in here. The Shiola hits the fan, and you can tell that very much in this panel here, which I found really, really cool. I love the little details, like his logo being formed in the background there. But yeah, I quite enjoyed Punisher Born. This book starts off on a pretty high note, I will say. And then, of course, Frank Castle comes home after that, and his family was killed, and he was never really the same after that, was he? But then we really start getting into the meat of this omnibus, which is the main Punisher Max series, because Born was basically just a prequel series. But we start off here with In the Beginning, and what this pretty much focuses on is it centers around this attack on the Italian mob, and yeah, you can immediately see, this book doesn't pull any punches. This is very brutal. But yeah, Punisher goes after the Italian mob, hits them while they're weak, hits them while they're at a funeral, mourning the loss of some other guys. The story's pretty interesting because Frank gets to reunite with his old sidekick, Micro. Now, I haven't read any other Punisher series, but clearly him and Micro must have had some kind of falling out before this, because they're very distant. They're separate. They're separated at this point. But Micro is trying to reach out to him again, contact Frank, inform him of these government figures, I believe. They're trying to get Frank to go after some terrorists, basically, which is pretty interesting because the Punisher doesn't really take orders from anybody, but whatever. They might as well try, right? This is a good time to mention the covers. I love the freaking covers in this book, because Punisher is depicted practically like a horror movie slasher in these. Like, he looks like freaking Michael Myers or something, and you just really get the feeling of unease that the thugs and criminals have, the way they perceive him. It's sold really well. But yeah, I mean, the story wasn't super memorable. Like I said, it's just basically Frank going after a bunch of mobsters. It's incredibly violent, lots of action. He has to... they introduced this character known as O'Brien. She's like this agent. I didn't think she was written particularly interestingly in this story. Her thing is basically she's just horny for violence and for Frank Castle a lot of the time. And then the next story you get in here is Kitchen Irish. And, this really is pretty similar to the first arc, because, instead of going after the Italian mobsters now it focuses on the Irish gangs. And what's the focus here is that there's basically this gang war going on, centering around... they're fighting over this large sum of money that was left behind by one of their previous leaders. And, that causes a lot of chaos and violence and everything, and Frank has to do something about it. But I'll be honest, I wasn't really that invested in this arc either. Where this book did get interesting for me again was this arc here, Mother Russia. First of all, I quite like the art in this arc, but what this centers around is Nick Fury reaches out to Punisher and recruits him for a top secret spy mission So immediately there's this very sort of Mission Impossible feeling to this arc, which I quite enjoyed. Basically, Punisher has to retrieve a bioweapon from a military base in Russia. A bioweapon that can basically turn people, just melt their skin and everything, just leave them as a skeleton. So Punisher has to break into this military base, retrieve this bioweapon, and, everything goes smoothly, as you can imagine. But no, there's also, there's complications, because there's this little girl involved as a hostage there, and Frank also has to bring her back. And that's really interesting, because you get to see how Frank's attitude changes as he interacts with this little girl. Because, the Punisher, Frank Castle, is a pretty scary individual, but yeah, you can see how he changes around innocent people, and especially children as well. How he becomes very, very protective. And that was nice to see. It humanizes him in a very contrasting way to how he typically is portrayed. I will say, though, by this point in the omnibus is where I started to develop one of my bigger notable complaints about this omnibus, is that I noticed that pretty much everybody kind of talks the same. They're just constantly swearing in like every other sentence. Not that that bothers me, but it's just weird, for example, to hear that from characters like Nick Fury. It's weird to hear Nick Fury swearing all the time, because, I don't know, I think of Nick Fury as this very intimidating figure with a lot of authority, and, he doesn't need to swear, in my opinion, to get his point across or to be intimidating. But I don't know, they do that in this book anyway. It kind of feels like the swearing doesn't have a lot of meaning behind it. More so it was like, oh, well, this is a max-rated title, so I suppose we should throw in some swearing and cursing just because. Whereas I compare it to something like Alias by Brian Michael Bendis, and from what I can remember anyway, it's, there was swearing in that book, but it was used pretty sparingly. And when it was used, it was like there was always like an intention, a meaning behind it, a purpose. Whereas I didn't really get that with this book. And the other characters in this book are even worse. Like the thugs, the gangsters, the government officials, the Italians, the Irish, the Russians. Really, everybody starts to kind of feel the same. It just feels like just about everybody in this book is just a massive piece of shit. They're either drug peddlers or racists or rapists or murderers. And I don't know, it kind of really forces you to suspend your disbelief. But it can be a little bit monotonous at times when all these supposedly different characters start to feel the same. But I maintain that the plot of the stories themselves is still interesting. It's just a lot of the characters can start to feel a little bit indistinguishable. But anyway, the next two arcs in here are also pretty strong. The second last one you get is Up is Down, Black is White. And to summarize it real quickly, by this point in the story, the Italians are in complete shambles because of what Frank did to them earlier in this book. But this psychotic criminal known as Nicholas Cavella rises up. He's this psycho who murdered his family as a kid, and he wants to take over the Italian mob now that they've been weakened. He tries to provoke Frank Castle by defiling the remains of his family, and that's putting it lightly. Trying to draw Frank out, set a trap for him, get rid of him, so that the mob can kind of take over and rise to power again. And, of course that doesn't go over well with Frank at all. He gets pretty pissed from that, and then it turns into this sort of this fight between the two of them. And then the very last arc you get is called The Slavers, and this centers around this kind of sex trafficking ring that Frank catches wind of and has to take apart, basically. All the while, there are some corrupt members of the police force that decide they're going to try to go after Frank Castle. basically say that they've had enough of him and his methods. They're going to try to bring him in. And that, of course, adds complications as well. And I guess the only other thing I'll talk about is the art in this book. I quite liked it. It worked for me. Everything feels, I want to say, appropriately dirty in this with the art. I wouldn't necessarily call it realistic. It's definitely stylized, which I think helps, but definitely doesn't shy away from depicting the violence. That's for sure. And I've already talked about how I love the covers in this book. I don't know the name of the artist who did the covers. Let's see if we can find one. Yeah, oh, that's so cool. Yeah, love the covers of this book. But anyway, that's all I want to go over for the story, so let's take a look at some of the extras you get. Here we are with the extras section. The extra section you get in this omnibus is pretty straightforward. We have some cover sketches here, and then we have some pieces on the Punisher Born story. Got a piece here by Derek Robertson, and he's sort of talking about how they really wanted to make that story feel authentic. So they were researching a whole bunch of photos from the Vietnam War and using that as inspiration. And then you have various character designs and layouts, and then a whole bunch of designs from other areas, other stories, layouts, lots of inks and colors and art process, so to speak. We won't go through everything, but there's a healthy amount of those in there. So pretty cool. And that about does it for your extra section. As for build quality, in this Omni we have 864 pages. There is the eye you get. This is another very, very strong point about this book. Well, this printing anyway. We'll see how the reprint turns out. But yeah, barely any gutter loss in this book. It lays over pretty fantastically, no matter where you are in the book. The page quality is quite good. I don't recall ever noticing an instance of page bleed anywhere. And there's lots of darker colors used anyway, so that automatically helps with hiding any page bleed if it were to occur. But yeah, pretty happy with the build of this book. But all right, ladies and gentlemen, we're closing in on the end of this review, so I will just finish up here with some closing thoughts. First of all, I'll say if you're sensitive to mature topics and themes, like the ones I mentioned at the beginning, I would steer far away from this book because, honestly, it can be a bit much at times. But again, I understand that's very much a Garth Ennis thing. But otherwise, if you're interested in The Punisher, a lot of people claim that this is his best run. Now, I can't comment on that because I haven't read other Punisher runs, but I can tell you I had a pretty good time with this. Because you don't even need to have any familiarity with Marvel or superheroes at all to go into this. It really doesn't feel like a superhero story a lot of the time anyway. There's barely any connection to the wider Marvel universe. It's very much in its own bubble. So if you'd like that sort of gritty, dark, violent, John Wick type story where there's just this hero dismantling his enemies without any hesitation, you'll probably enjoy this. But hey, that's been my review of Punisher Max by Garth Ennis Omnibus Volume 1. So you let me know what you thought about this book or the stories inside, anything like that. Is this your favorite Punisher run if you've read it before? Or is there another Punisher run that you like more? You let me know down below, or if you have any questions or anything like that, I'll be happy to help you out. But thank you so much for joining me today, guys. I hope to catch you in another video real soon. So you have yourself a great day. I've been Superfly Comics Guy, and until next time, you keep reading. Bye-bye, guys.